great to see such a packed house. For a real confidence builder, about maybe a minute and a half ago, I was sitting next to an attendee, and she goes, "Oh, you're speaking?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "Ooh, that's the hardest time you've got." Fantastic. Yeah. I wasn't going to arm wrestle. Quick note, folks. First off, some of these slides are going to be relatively wordy, and then a few of them may have to use intentionally specific language. So I am absolutely going to make these available after the presentation if you want them as a PDF or the keynote or whatever. Nothing's necessarily copyrighted. Anything that I'm using that someone else's will be sorted, or cited and sourced, not sorted, which should help you in any additional research or exploration that you want to do after this. So we're going to be talking about design success in turbulent, ambiguous spaces. I think this is going to be not only pretty relevant today, but you're also going to see and hear a lot of common themes that we've been exploring all day and throughout even some of the workshops, particularly some of the messaging around systems thinking that we've already heard from Cheryl and from Nathan and from Carol that I think is going to be really relevant, and Chris as well. So let's see. Perfect. You were right. So my name is Chris Avore. I recently started leading about 150 design research and content folks at Northwestern Mutual. Prior to that, I was at Meta, and then also co-wrote Liftoff, a design management leadership book, and also the new design frontier with Leah Bewley during my time at Envision. You may have noticed that that book is not upstairs, so I found out how to put a QR code to the Rosenfeld site if you'd like, and I was like, hey, I could actually use Bruno's name here. Like he totally hooked up the endorsement. So I have not been around to sign any books. However, if you'd like me to sign any other book you may have, I am your Huckleberry. I will be here. I will be at the party tonight. You bring it, I'll sign it. So what could go wrong, right? So let's start with what's changed since last year. Maybe a couple things, right? About a year ago, we were starting to feel a couple headwinds, but we were still in this kind of explosive growth era where we were into this era of fast track interviewing, multiple offers for designers. Teams were just trying to hire, and scale at all costs. And then for a lot of designers, if that company or organization wasn't paying you enough, or didn't get design, or just thought you were some downstream kind of like production artist, you'd be like, peace, I'm out. I got 10 other offers. I could fall out of one of those trees out there and have a job on 10 branches I was hitting on the way down, right? Smash cut now, it's a little different, right? We've obviously witnessing a lot of turbulence in these markets, a lot of uncertainty, not only in our own jobs, but also in our organizations as well. We've heard a lot about ruthless prioritization, especially in like public companies' earnings calls when they're talking about how they're gonna try to trim costs. And we've even heard folks say like, do more with less, or Elon Musk's infamous, we are going to be extremely hardcore. I still don't know what the hell that means. But this is absolutely catching on at the highest levels of macroeconomics, right? So, the World Economic Forum just this past January, this is one of their primary topics that they were trying to explore. Basically, this is all of major business and political leaders trying to get together to find out what issues are addressing, the global markets. And then, so this is legit, right? We could use that as a barometer of this turbulence here, because what they were talking about is, finding opportunities to cooperate in this fragmented world. And this fragmented world, I think, is actually a pretty accurate depiction of where we are today. What we have seen over time leading up to this are a lot of generational trends, right? So we've seen a lot of like digitization of massive amounts of information. We've seen, like massive wealth changes for people who previously did not have nearly the type of access to even things like water or electricity that we've been able to do in the last 30 years, 50 years that are just starting to bubble up. And we're seeing absolutely new wholesale rewriting of business norms that didn't exist a number of years ago. So that's at a micro scale. Then if we look at like just very recently, this is where we get into like the war in Ukraine, where we talk about stocks down 30% or worse throughout much of the world, not just in North American markets at all. Real estate and crypto and banks have all crashed. Interest rates have been rising to combat inflation. Again, not just in America, but worldwide. And of course, those massive tech layoffs based on a result of that mentality of scale at all costs. So this usually leaves folks like us being kind of like, great, I guess I'll go to a design conference and try to get better at a job I hope I still have. Or you can, of course, go the Liz Lemon route and just think, I lay at night wondering what fresh hell tomorrow may bring. I'm definitely more of that version than the this is fine. But what we're basically, though, is what we're seeing is that we're feeling much of this impact because a lot of these organizations have been unprepared or willing to adapt when confronted with a lot of this turbulence, right? They're not, oftentimes in system thinking terms, we use the term resilience. And then a lot of these systems, what we have been seeing, have actually been fragile. And when things are fragile, they can break, and they are very hard to rebuild. Most of these companies' successes have been built on delivering products that were predictable and via repeatable means focused on one small part of a very larger system. And so if you think about it, if you have your typical IKEA directions, you have all of these parts on the floor, you could put them together and build a drawer or a shelf. And then you could take apart all of those exact same parts and lay them all back on the floor. And you have basically built something and you could take it apart and you have all the same parts. Complexity is going to be a lot different than that. We're going to talk about that. These companies are able to thrive on that certainty and minimizing as much risk as possible when they're trying to create those, basically those very predictable systems. So predictable and repeatable is great when we're talking about complicated environments. However, that is not the case when we're talking about complex environments. Now, I'm sure a lot of you folks have been hearing terms like complexity and complex throughout the afternoon and throughout the week of workshops. It's important to note that when I'm using complex, I'm absolutely trying to refer to it as a definition, meaning that like there are multiple points of entry or exit, that there are multiple parties, emergent behaviors. I'm not using it to mean like it's hard. Oftentimes you'll hear people say like, could you make the complex simple? And that's usually saying like, could you make the car an apple? Like we're usually looking for clarity out of complexity. We're not necessarily looking to try to reduce or eliminate complexity. It's really kind of hard to do that, right? So what we're going to end up seeing is that in a complicated world, we can look to the past to find patterns and previous solutions. We can apply best practices. We can apply a lot of lessons that we have seen at other jobs. We can say, hey, that worked in 2005. That worked in 2015. Let's apply it now. But what we can start to see, though, is that in this complex world, depending on patterns of the past can be expensive and ultimately disastrous. We're starting to see a lot of this in management writing as well. So Amy Edmondson of Harvard Business School said that most managers have been either explicitly or implicitly trained to think in terms of accomplishing fixed goals, tasks, and deliverables in a predictable world. That must be nice, right? And so what she's ultimately saying, though, is that we all know that's not that kind of world anymore. And yet the fundamental mindset and skills of management work best for fixed, understandable, reasonably predictable deliverables. And so what we can see here, unfortunately, this is probably going to look pretty familiar to a lot of us in our day-to-day efforts when we are at work. We'll see fixed goals, where annual planning, where a bunch of bosses all decide what we're going to design and build, and then regardless of what happens throughout the course of the year, they're going to build that come hell or high water. They may be only focused on delivering something because they said that's what they were going to deliver, even if all of the research indicates otherwise. Fixed deliverables may mean that you're committing to all of the things before you know about any of the things. You're like, okay, you'll get 3 personas, you'll get 6 customer journeys, and a bunch of prototypes in Figma. And you're like, is that the right thing? Like, we don't even know that yet. We haven't necessarily done enough work to even have confidence that that's the right work we should even be doing. And then especially when that's predictable, when they're trying to be risk averse, when you finally start bringing design work out into the wild, or you start putting it in front of clients or customers, and you're trying to do some like late stage usability testing because you weren't allowed to do it any further upstream, and you're finding out that it's really not doing what it's supposed to do, but they're like, well, you can make the button a little bit bigger. Maybe we make the blue a little bit richer. That'll solve everything, right? And that's when you really see that predictable mindset at work. I mean, I tell you what, folks, I don't know if the Three Stooges necessarily resonates here in Europe, but like I feel this every day, right? Where a bunch of people, a bunch of bosses, we're all looking over the magic 8-ball, trying to say like, well, how many releases is it going to take, Chris? Or how many designers do you need? Like I could just count up exactly how many colors we need will determine how many designers we'll have on the project, right? And then just also saying, when will this ship? Give me a date. Give me that certainty that I'm so longing for. And they're just not going to find it. So success, when we're looking at those types of projects, it's going to be measured in silos. It's going to be subjective, where bosses are just like, yes, that's good work, but they have no way of quantifying it. Or it's out of touch with real impact to business and society. And oftentimes we'll see that rendered as like, was the work delivered on time? Did we build the number of features we said we would? That one kills me. Actually, no, these all kill me, because you know what else kills me? Did dev have to make changes? Nothing drives me more nuts than when somebody doesn't want to make a change that is going to be valuable for the business, but they're like, oh, but no, they'll get mad at us if we have to make the change. But also, too, did we beat any other departments to it? I have seen incentives such that teams are actually competing with each other to try to ship work. Now, when we think of some of the systems level work, especially some of the stuff that Cheryl was talking about, that should lead to a disaster if you have competing incentives like that. And so what we're starting to see here, especially in those types of situations, as Carol McGrath said, businesses that used to be separate are now interconnected and interdependent, which means these systems are more complex. So again, we're not throwing complex around to just mean it's difficult or it's challenging or it's kind of messy. We're trying to say that they're interconnected, they're dependent, there's emergent behaviors there. And that means something. And what that means is that we can use systems thinking frameworks as designers, a lot of these popularized by Dr. Leah Okoroglu, to help us as designers make some sense out of some of this mess and find ways to be able to apply what relatively normal design practices in a systems thinking umbrella, so that I don't want you folks thinking that you have to start doing something new or something crazy because now you're going to do the systems thinking part of the design process. There's not like a third diamond. So it's not a triple diamond where first it was like, discover, and then we're going to squeeze systems thinking in here, and then there's another diamond over here for discover and develop. But what we're starting to see here is like we're talking about the interconnectedness. We're talking about circular. We're talking about looking for the emergence out instead of silos and finding those relationships instead of just finding those isolated pieces. And so when we want to zoom in and try to actually apply this to our work, folks, this isn't that different. Like, these are things that you could want to do, but a lot of these things are likely stuff that you're regularly doing, but now you're trying to just either amplify a little bit louder or try to escalate or elevate the altitude in which you're doing it. So for instance, when you're looking for those circular approaches, versus a linear, when you're saying, well, what's the roadmap and we're never going to iterate because we're building it and then we're moving on because we have backlog to fill. Trying to map those experiences beyond just the perceived beginning or end of the experience, right? That's exactly what Cheryl talked about this morning when she said that yesterday's solutions are today's problems. In a circular systems thinking mindset, that's absolutely going to be top of mind. You're going to be saying like, well, what did we learn from last time? Because now that train's coming right back around. And then in emergence versus those silos, emergence is a heady topic. That's like where you're starting to see things that previously had no impetus that are now basically being rendered. So what we can see is like actually promoting, not just tolerating or hoping for new or unexpected outcomes throughout the design process, instead of saying, we know all of the things we know about this, just go build it, designers, where we could be some of those canaries in that proverbial coal mine where we're like, whoa, folks, we're starting to see some stuff here. We're starting to see that people don't need this, or perhaps the way they're using it is entirely different than the way we were expecting them to use it. A lot of good products and services have been built that way when companies thought they were building one thing, but people are using it an entirely different way. Secondly, when we look at like wholes versus parts, when we're understanding more than just direct users, right? Trying to look for those second and third degree users, or the users among the people who are actually going to be putting up with it. A really interesting case study for this is when Airbnb was obviously going out, a design-led company going out and interviewing, people who wanted to stay in a home not their own, people who wanted to rent their home out to the people who were going to be visiting. But then there was also this like creation or this degradation of the sense of neighborhood when you lived next door to two other people who were renting out their homes as Airbnbs, and you never know who was going to be your neighbor for the next week. And it just created this sense of like isolation and loneliness in what had been a vibrant community of an apartment or a condominium. Again, are they going to stop the business because of that? Probably not, but they're also maybe going to be able to take steps to mitigate some of that, or to at least raise some awareness of that throughout the design process, so that maybe they can reduce that, or maybe they can raise some type of awareness that could improve that experience for the people who aren't even using that system. And then again, when we're looking at relationships instead of isolation, I kind of turned this one a little bit inward, right? Having that cognitive humility to be asking questions, to be able to speak truth to power, to say, are we sure we should be doing that? Because you should have a relationship there instead of being off on your own. Being able to foster psychological safety so that that is okay amongst your teams. You're not going to be punished or frowned upon for that type of behavior. And also, as Cheryl mentioned today, diversifying and empowering your stakeholders. I really want to focus on the empowering part, because diversifying absolutely is critical, but also giving them the agency and the ability to do something different, and to be able to say, that could be a problem, let's explore it more, is going to be tremendously useful as we try to make sense of all of this turbulence and complexity. So here what we can do is basically try to measure success more holistically, right? Not just my team beat your team, not just, well, we shipped 8 features, and you're like, awesome, why didn't you ship 10? Or was it great that you didn't ship 5, right? And also ultimately considering the ecosystem in which this work exists. We want to be asking ourselves questions at the end of those projects, like, did it create positive business value? Or are there other things that we've started to notice in research or metrics that we're like, uh-oh, we have to take action because we could be creating an environment of harm or trauma here. We have to do something now, whether it's roll something back, put out a patch, change it, do it, whatever, but at least let's have that awareness that something could be amiss and take action on that. Then also, where else could we drive change? When we're starting to see these second or third order things, when we're looking downstream or at second or third order of consequences based on our decisions, where else do we need to make changes? So what we're going to start seeing is that the system thinking will prepare us and ultimately propel designers to thrive in the ambiguous in these complex spaces. And then what we're going to see, and this may be good news, it may be bad news, a lot of folks are going to start looking to us, for better or for worse. Design leaders, all of us, are going to be expected to embrace that ambiguity by making decisions with fewer facts. We're going to have less guidance by our bosses. They're just going to be looking at us, folks. They're going to say, well, we're kind of going to forget titles here. We're just going to hope that you know what the heck you're doing, and that your methods will find the insights to give us the conviction that we need so that we can absolutely start making real decisions. So what we've seen here is that these generational trends, combined with recent fragmenting factors, such as current market conditions, and then that emerging complexity throughout all of the things we're working on now, is creating this environment of rarely before seen ambiguity. And if we wanted to think about what that root cause of ambiguity could look like, there's a bunch of them, right? Or at least attributes of it too. Success is going to be hard to predict or plan, or new methods or models of customer interactions that, again, we previously were able to comfortably predict that now are far more organic. Even organizations that were previously partners or had a symbiotic relationship with are now competitors. All of that is going to improve or increase the degree of ambiguity in which we're trying to operate and design in. And so we've even seen a couple design leaders from IDEO call this the biggest challenge that we're going to be facing now. The biggest challenge to businesses right now isn't uncertainty, but ambiguity, they said. A condition in which the future is unclear, the past is no help, and we don't even know what we don't know. I mean, when we think about it, a lot of these questions, I think, are probably things that a lot of us feel at a project kickoff. Hopefully we're invited in at least most of those kickoffs. But I don't necessarily have a lot of confidence that people would all ask or would all answer these the same exact way. If you were in a room with 5 other bosses and you started asking them all of this, are they all going to answer the same thing? I don't know. I'm not sure. Hopefully you folks have better success than that, because we do so much work around alignment to make sure that folks understand where we're starting and what we're actually going to do and what done could look like, or what we need to learn before we're comfortable even saying what done may be. And so what we start to see is this continuum of trying to operate through ambiguity, where leaders will take either no action or they'll take immediate action. And when they're taking no action, they're oftentimes, they're in that mode of paralysis by way of analysis. They want more facts, they need more data, they need more research to say, okay, we can commit to doing something now. And then on the flip side, you have bosses who are don't care, full speed ahead, let's figure it out as we go. And then they're taking immediate action, deploying resources, oftentimes at the expense of other projects that they may have more confidence in, just so that they can get this work done. And so what we want to try to figure out as we try to operate through ambiguity is where we can take deliberate or intentional action. Learning from discrete and deliberate actions help us navigate that ambiguity one step at a time. We're able to basically start to gain confidence and conviction by some of these experiments where we can say, well, we don't have all the information, but we're starting to learn a little bit more than we knew yesterday, and I can put that to work. And I kind of threw up like a relatively easy kind of model here where you could be saying, like, this is what I want to look for. This is how I want to craft an experiment. I don't really want to get into stuff like, well, is your dev environment set up for experimentation? Do you need some third-party provider to enable A/B testing, stuff like that? I don't want to. We can talk about that at the bar. Make sure I've had about 19 drinks, though, and I'll give you a great lot of insight. Rather, let's talk about more of like what we would want to learn and why and what we would do with it. And that's where we're trying to get through here by saying just like, what have we started to see and what do we think we might want to change? Who are we going to be trying to see if we can monitor that change? And then for how long? And then what will we expect to happen? But then what's also trying to be important too is what we would do with that info, right? And basically trying to make sure that we're assigning ranges when we're conducting some of these experiments. Because all too often, I've seen a lot of executives really start to love the idea of experiments because they're thinking it's going to cover their ass, right? They think, oh, great, if we do this experiment, likelihood of disaster is reduced. Now you can hear them trying to creep back into that risk aversion phase, right? Instead, what we want to do though is be trying to call out based on past behavior degrees of success or failure to guide what we will do next. Because sometimes you could start to see things performing really well that may not actually be great for either the business or society, and that's a good spot to say, we need to tap the brakes a little bit here. We need to unpack more of why this thing is performing super well, because it may not mean that we're just a bunch of geniuses. There could be something wrong afoot there. So when you're thinking about this idea of when to take action and how to be deliberate, let's think through kind of like that head in your head of what to do. Oftentimes when you're stuck in that mode of paralysis by looking for that analysis, it's time to start slowing down, when you think you need to speed up, right? Or you need that time to think, or everyone else is talking, but no one's actually listening to each other. Just a lot of voices in the room talking past each other because no one's aligned. On the flip side, it may be time to start accelerating or speeding up when your idea is still only kind of half-baked. You're still chewing on it. You're not necessarily sure what it is it's going to turn into, but you need to make a commitment and you need to start putting one foot in front of the other. That's when it's time to start speeding up. And then, of course, when due dates or deadlines are approaching, because we don't want to necessarily just be like, sorry, boss, need more time to chew on this. Talk to me in a week. That's not going to earn you the influence that you're looking for. And also when you're feeling overwhelmed by too many options. And again, so that's when you're saying like, all right, well, maybe we'll pick one or two, but you're going to measure the heck out of it so that you're getting conviction to know that you chose the right one or the wrong one and it's not too late. I'll be honest though, like I kind of walked you through what seemed like a formula, right? Fill in this word, fill in that word, fill in a couple of these words, put some numbers in here, and bada bing, right? We're done. You're going to find that it's still absolutely a balancing act and not a formula. What we're going to find is that not everything will necessarily warrant an experiment. Not necessarily everything will warrant trying to ask everyone to slow down. So you're going to have to start being comfortable, again, with being uncomfortable in that space of ambiguity. So what we're going to see here is that design leaders will be expected to drive their partners and their teams to decisions in these ambiguous environments. We're going to end up needing that to basically negotiate that balancing act of experimentation, considering multiple paths and their trade-offs and illustrating how learning something could give us that confidence and conviction to start making decisions that will rally our teams and our leaders on. So if this was kind of like that first equation that we looked at of generational trends and fragmenting factors and emerging complexity all was netting this ambiguity, we could then kind of like do that same type of model and say that, well, if we're applying systems thinking, we're dedicating ourselves to an experimentation mindset, and then we're actually expecting complex environments, and we're expecting ambiguity to be all around us, we can actually start probably being in a position for design-led success. And also, as Nathan just said about an hour ago, how design thinking supercharges systems thinking. And Carl Schwab of the World Economic Forum straight up agrees. He said, design thinking, particularly employing the techniques and philosophy of human-centered design, as well as systems thinking approaches, can help us understand the structures that guide the world and appreciate the new technologies that may shift systems into new configurations. And that's where we really get back into that emergent idea of where things that were aren't things that are now. That's exactly why this is not one big IKEA assembly instruction set, right? You take a complex system, you break it apart to its most minute structures. It's a lot different than how it started. And so Schwab basically developed 4 tenets to systems thinking here, or for systems leaders, where we should be thinking in terms of systems instead of technologies. We should be trying to intentionally design things instead of letting them just happen by default. We should be trying to empower instead of determine, and we should be trying to treat our own values and the values of our organizations, hopefully, as a feature and not a bug, not something that gets in the way, not something that's inconvenient. And I really hope that this isn't that new, that this is stuff that I've been talking about for the last, 23 minutes or so, but stuff that you've heard all day. Now, I couldn't quite put everybody's head on here, but I think that what you're gonna see here, though, is that this should be a consistent drumbeat. So I want you folks to kind of think through some of these questions, right? Around when has your org actually tried to make a change based on, was a value gonna be treated as a feature and not a bug? Or when have you been able to see, trying to empower your people instead of expecting them to just do exactly what they're told? So I'd love to hear about some of these stories tonight at the various events. Super great to be here, folks. Really appreciate all of your work today. Thank you all.